I'm on. Yes, this is the woman who tells everyone to use the microphone. Right, good evening and welcome to this meeting of the Policy Panel. I'm Councillor Leslie Scott-Brutell. I'm the Deputy Chair of the panel and will be chairing tonight's meeting. To begin the meeting, there are a few matters of housekeeping. There are no practice evacuations planned for this evening, so if an alarm sounds, please evacuate the Town Hall by going down the main staircase or the back staircase to the High Street and then to the car park behind the Town Hall in St Ronald Street. This meeting is being recorded for a live broadcast over the internet on the Council's YouTube channel and will also be available to watch afterwards. Note to myself, please would speakers use microphones at all times and speak directly into the microphone, as this activates the audio recording and is required for those using the hearing loop system. Please speak from a position close to your microphone. Members of the panel use electronic devices to access their agenda and reports and may view and participate in social media. Visitors are also welcome to use mobile phones and other devices, including cameras, but please use them discreetly, set them to silent, and do not use voice or camera flash functions. We may have a break at 8 o'clock, subject to the items remaining. There are toilets on every floor in the building and an induction loop in this room. Let's start with introductions. Members of the panel and officers will introduce themselves, starting with Richard, to my right.
Richard Clifford, Democratic Services Manager.
Good evening, Councillor Sam McCarthy representing Shrub End.
Good evening, Councillor Labour member representing Greensted Ward.
Councillor Faith Smalls representing Old Heath, The Hive and Roe Hedge, and I'm substituting for Councillor Laws.
Councillor Kevin Beckley representing Marks Tay and Lair Ward.
Councillor Sue Seymour, Prettygate Ward.
Councillor Rees Smithson, Tiptree Ward.
Councillor David King, Leader of
Arundel, Head of Sustainability.
Rosa Tanfield, Head of Neighbourhood Services.
Karen Syrett, Head of Planning.
Owen Howell, Democratic Services Officer, and Chairman, I can confirm that Councillor Martin Goss, Portfolio Holder for Neighbourhood Services and Waste, has joined us online.
Jessica Douglas, Head of People.
Thank you. And there are no urgent items scheduled for this meeting. Has anybody got any declarations of interest? Julie.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. It's on the ID Verdi contract and it's in relation to my son's membership of Colchester and East Essex Cricket Club that's mentioned in the report.
Thank you. Let's go on to item 5, the minutes. Is everybody happy with the minutes from last time?
Agreed.
Agreed, those minutes, thank you. Have your say. We have nobody queuing up to have your say unless Councillor Goss wants to have his say. No. Okay, so let's go into item 7, which is the Colchester Landscape, Nature and Waterway Strategy Update. Karen, you'll be leading on this, won't you? If you could start then, please.
Thank you. So, members, the purpose of this report tonight is to update the panel on how work in this area has progressed since it was last discussed in November. So I think everyone agrees that the existing strategies that we're currently relying on are now out of date and in need of a refresh. I did read the minutes of the last meeting, or that meeting in November, and I picked up on all the suggestions and all the points that were raised there, and I think I agree with just about everyone. They included about a need to consult and engage with all members, to include the coast, and to prepare some baseline mapping. Those are just some of the key points that I pulled out. In the past, this sort of work has been outsourced, but for a number of reasons, the approach is now to undertake this in-house. I think, after all, we probably all know our area better than anyone else. So since November, officers have begun to think about reviewing the local plan as well as reviewing this piece of evidence-based work. And as you know, the local plan does seek to do more than just plan for housing. We tend to think that's what it's all about, but there's much more to it than that. And part of it is about recognising the importance of the blue and green infrastructure network within the city. There's a report going to Local Plan Committee next week, which outlines a new approach to the early stages of preparing the local plan. And this will involve a more iterative approach to engagement and consultation, rather than the 6-week formal process that we in the past have gone through. At issues and options stage, it's very much down to us to decide how we engage people. There's not a formal process prescribed in regulations like there is at later stages. So what we're intending to do, subject to the committee's agreement next week, is to enable key themes to be investigated, the first one of which is identified in the report and includes the green network and waterways. So work has already commenced on this and does reflect that discussion by this panel last year, and we're mapping the existing network and carrying out an audit and baseline of the current location and condition of all types of blue and green infrastructure and spaces. The intention is to engage with stakeholders and local communities, including parish and town councils, to enable them to provide us with a detailed piece of evidence base in which to take things forward. It will also include opportunities and identifying where there's opportunities to improve and enhance both networks, connections, and also existing spaces and water. Officers are intending to publish the baseline information and then seek comments on whether it covers everything, whether we've missed anything, and where those opportunities exist. Officers consider that new housing allocations, which will be needed as part of a local plan, however strongly we might feel about that, could help facilitate some new green spaces and could also provide those links between existing green spaces. These will benefit not only people's health and well-being by encouraging more people to walk or cycle, but also improve facilities and conditions for wildlife and biodiversity. So it doesn't make sense for two pieces of very similar work to be undertaken at the same time. And it's more important really to ensure the right officers and all councillors are involved in that process, as well as local people with local knowledge. Given the statutory nature of the local plan, it therefore seems sensible for the process for that to be the process through which the new blue and green infrastructure strategy is produced. Thank you.
Councillor Bentley.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair, and excellent report. Thank you very much indeed, and first class piece of work. I just want to ask a question around new housing, because we've been building housing at a considerable rate in Colchester for quite a few years. Some of that new housing, in fact a lot of the new housing estates, have maintenance contracts, maintenance companies that look after them and not us, which I perfectly understand. Now, certainly my inbox indicates that many people are not very happy with the service that they receive, and indeed much of it can't be authorised by Highways or anyone else, which is Essex County Council, and that's my interest if you wish to record it, until it's adopted. It can take up to a decade for that to happen. Therefore, with this policy, and you mention new housing, how are we going to cover that to make sure that everyone, wherever they live, in whichever circumstances, have the right to have a good green space that's well maintained?
Karen, would you like to answer that or take 2 or 3 questions in one go?
I'm happy to answer it, or if there's related points or questions, take them together, but no one's indicating.
Julie,
Oh,
you were indicating.
Well, sort of, but it wasn't what I was going to talk about. I think there's an example of that in Wivenhoe with the water feature there, which has, been an ongoing issue with Persimmon, which probably still isn't resolved today. So I think Kevin's right to raise that. I'm not sure whether it's really relevant to this piece of work, but I think it's something that the local plan committee needs to address. My question was about, in terms of your evidence gathering, I presume that there is a variable percentage of wards that are, it's a variety within wards. So will that actually be used in consideration about housing allocation as well in the future? So where there's a deficit of green and blue infrastructure, will that count in terms of whether that's considered for additional housing?
Thank you. I certainly. Oh, can I take two? Sorry. Would you mind if I answered two in case I get lost and lose the detail? Thank you. First of all, I haven't got the answer to Kevin's questions, and I think we've probably all got examples of where that's happened. And unfortunately, it's not just where there's private maintenance. It's sometimes, I can think of an example on the Garrison where it's land being handed over to the council, but it's taken however long to get up to a standard that we will accept. So what I will do is take that away, because it's an issue and we're at the issues and options stage. So I'll take that away and see how we can best deal with that through the local plan and policies, which can then influence decision making. In terms of the variable percentage of open space, it certainly does vary. And you might be surprised to know that Prettygate has the lowest percentage of open space. Yes, yeah. And very little room for development as well. Sue and I are probably pleased about that, but others might not be. So it certainly plays into it. And I think, part of the identifying opportunities is about looking at where there might be areas that we could either enhance or help create if need be. And certainly that can help influence allocations, both on the housing side, but also where we're seeking to protect land as well.
Sorry. Thank you. It's just about consultation in 4.4. I really like the idea of the interactive map and the public being able to feed into that. But there are always some people, and I think it is a minority, who want to give their views in a pen and paper way, and they want to see the paper. We've had this with St Botolph's recently, people and the master plan. People have been saying on social media, I'd like a paper copy, I don't want to do it this way. And I acknowledge, I think those people are definitely a minority, and I really support, to do it online. But I'm just wondering if there will be a consideration of that, just to make sure that everybody does feel included.
That's a short one, yes, definitely. We would look to involve everyone. And I think part of the consultation and engagement strategy that's going to local plan committee next week talks about different forms of engagement as well, and how we might do things differently going forward. So yeah, any idea, we always ask for ideas from people about, where and how. So if there is anything in particular, do let us know.
Councillor Lissamore.
Yes, I just wanted to comment on the time period, really, and I just wondered if you could elaborate why it's taking so long to put this together. Is it because of its link with the local plan, or is it officer time? It seems sort of started 2022, looking at finishing 2025, 26. To a resident out there, that seems a very, very long time.
Yeah, Rosa might want to add something about what's happened in the past, because I've only sort of come into this fairly recently. But the process of a local plan is quite a lengthy one, and to properly engage with people does take time. There will certainly be information that's available and useful for people before that point in time. You know, the baseline mapping will, I think, evolve and will remain on the website and wherever it might be published and updated as we get more and more evidence to help inform that. But because the local plan is so dependent on so many other studies, they will help inform the final output of this as well.
And if I can add to that as well, just from what will be the sustainability side of things. So Mel will be taking over this area, but I've obviously been leading on that for the last few years. Once the guiding principles have been developed, Karen's team, that will then give us that consistency across the organisation. We're looking around winter 23-24, so about a year's time, 18 months time or so. There's then the opportunity for the policy panel to then start looking at delivery plans and operational plans that feed from that. So that's going to give us a really clear map of how we're going to be managing our assets coming forward. So it is time that we've got to, steps that we've got to take, and it will take time to make sure that we produce something of value for you to consider and agree and take forward.
Thank you. If I may just come back then and direct my question to Councillor King as leader of the council. How then are you planning the long-term financial commitments to this?
No, that's not a question I have an easy answer to. You will know the challenges for us in budgetary terms. So to be blunt, there will be a series of choices and trade-offs. But no, I accept the challenge, and we'll see if we can give you an answer based on what we know. But I think the reality of policy without funding is it's pointless. So taking this approach, which I support, for the opportunities it implies for doing better with what we have and knowing it better, which leads me into a question I'll ask in a moment, is that we have to find funding where we can, but that might be, I suspect it will be, funding from a number of different sources. So Kevin to your left, you know him well, has a visionary approach to climate change engagement, which I've supported publicly and privately. So I would expect us to be talking to the two local councils as we do elsewhere, and with the long list of conservation and charitable organisations that have a deep interest here. And I have to say the future will be one where the City Council can't do what it once did. We haven't got the funding from any source, including central government the same way. It will be a variety of sources, including, in my view, local community councils, local parish councils. So the challenge is right. I haven't got you the answer, but I'll be happy to take that away and see where we might get to, and perhaps we might report back to the panel on that.
Thank you. Some of the panel members, Kevin, you were here, weren't we, when we were talking about signing up to workshops and taking this forward that way? So we've had a step or change on that, and we're looking at doing it in a different way, which actually does make sense, I think, as long as the consultation, which I think will be there, and we can cascade that out and let everybody be aware. This, will I take it, impact when you do the call for sites?
Yes, the call for sites this time around, it's never been solely on housing, but that, I'd probably say 95% of the sites we get in, if not more, are concerned with housing. Whereas this time around, we're going to be looking at all sorts of sites, including sites for biodiversity, net gain, blue and green infrastructure sites where they can be enhanced. So very much a focus of starting the other way around, if you know what I mean, rather than just looking at housing and fitting things in. It's looking at the blue and green infrastructure and making sure housing can be accommodated within that with least damage to the environment.
So this was for information only. Has anybody got any further questions, or we're all... Councillor King, how could I ignore you?
Easily, Chair. I'm but a humble visitor. I just wanted Karen to ask, you'll be aware that the master plan work, which Kevin and I and others have done our best to sponsor and see through, has sparked all sorts of responses. That's the whole idea of the process. Some of them include how we're going to use green space, and one in particular from a number of sources, Colchester Natural History Society among others, was around the use of waterways. The point being made that they are often rich places for rich biodiversity. Could you sort of talk to us a little bit about how the master plan relationship, what that is to this? Thank you.
Yes, I think that demonstrates how many documents are all influenced by each other, really. I think the master plan, I think, where people might be coming from is that they are expecting a very detailed plan for the whole city centre, picking up every site and the exact use on every part of the site, and, you know, not only sites but also green spaces. And I certainly know one representation talked about what would happen in the river and the lack of biodiversity assessment of that, or an impact assessment. But those sorts of things, those more detailed pieces of evidence, come at a later stage when we've worked up the proposals a bit more. To go out with something very definitive at this stage, I think would have undermined the whole point of engagement. And there was a lot of engagement prior to the 6-week formal stage, where people were able to input. But things like biodiversity studies, ecology reports, economic assessments will all follow and be on a more site-specific or project-specific basis. Does that help?
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just looking at the strategy and considering the council's financial position at the moment, has any consideration been given to generating revenue from our green and blue assets in any way, shape or form?
So I'll respond to that. And again, on behalf of sustainability, as Mel's only a couple of weeks into the role, but you're absolutely right. As part of some of the transformation savings that were set out by Cabinet earlier this year, there are work streams around commercialising or looking at the opportunity to generate income from our green spaces. And so there's work ongoing on that, and it won't be immediate, as you'd expect, because some of these things are quite challenging, particularly with certain sites, but it is a piece of work that we are working on and hope to start delivering over the next couple of years.
Subject to the assessments that we talked about.
Thank you. So everyone's happy for us to have the information only and the
Noted,
update,
I think, is the answer,
and then
Chair.
we'll move on to item 8, which, Rosa, you're leading on this, and welcome, Mel.
Okay, good evening, everyone. So again, I will be presenting this paper, but as Head of Neighbourhood Services, I no longer have the responsibility, unfortunately, of the greening team, parks and open spaces. That now falls to Mel, but Mel has only been in her role a couple of weeks, so I'm very much supporting her in the transition. So panel will recall, I'm just going to do a bit of a timeline, which I haven't actually included in the report, but I thought it would be helpful. The discussion around grounds maintenance actually came to policy panel on the 13th of January 2021. And at that point, we were discussing what the future of grounds maintenance may look like. And over that year, we did a number of workshops, and we we looked at different case studies and different operating models. And then on the 12th of January 2022, a year later, the panel agreed on the back of a business case that we would look at an in-house grounds maintenance model at the end of the contract with ID Verdi. That recommendation went to Cabinet, and on the 9th of March, they made that agreement. So that was March 2022. And the reason for the timing of that is that within the original contract with ID Verdi, which they tendered for, there was an ability within that contract for us to extend the contract for 3 years. But that was only if the council made a decision and gave notice up to 72 months from the date, from the commencement date, hence the start. So the last date for extension notice was 1st of April 2022, but that was to extend the contract for 3 years from October 2023. Hope that's clear, because basically we're still in the pre-existing contract. That contract effectively ends in October this year, and then the 3-year extension starts. And following that agreement, panel requested regular updates so that we could keep a monitor of how the progress was going on transitioning to that in-house model in October 26. So this report is your annual update in effect, the last one being only at the end of last year. And as you'll appreciate, not a lot has happened since that last meeting. However, the new structure for our own team is now in place and is being delivered, albeit there have been some vacancies and absences, etc., that have put some additional pressure on that team. But what I also wanted to provide you is an update on actually the contract with ID Verdi, and you'll all be aware of, again, some really difficult decisions that the council's had to make in terms of the financial challenges that it faces and the £10 million of extra cost and the budget deficit. And that decision has been to change some of the standards around our grass cutting, verge, hedge and border maintenance, which is detailed within the report. In addition, members will also be aware that we've done a lot of work around reducing the use of glyphosate-based weed killers as well, through our greening policy, and we've continued to do work on that and encourage others to start thinking about how they can also reduce their use of that kind of weed killer. So I'll just leave it there because it's a very brief update, and again, it's just a report for information.
Thank you. Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Rosa. Yeah, I'm really glad to be back on this panel because it was I was chairing it all those years ago, and I'm glad to be back to hopefully see this through. The one thing I want to ask, and I don't know if I keep getting this wrong, but I've asked it in different committees about different things, is responder. One of the things we discussed when we were doing our workshops was the lack of communication between us as councillors and ID Verdi, and when we report things, we very rarely hear back, and if there was a way of potential direct communication. Now, I don't know if that's something Responder can do, or you can just explain that a bit better, but will we as councillors have a platform that we can use? I know you're nodding away. I'll shut up and let you explain what it is, because I get it wrong, but I'm desperate for it. I'm sure we all are. Thank you.
Officers are desperate for it too. Responder is now Task Smart. Last year we were really lucky as an organisation to get external funding to really develop that module alongside some partner authorities. And we've driven forward with the development of that system, especially with the Street Care and Safety team, which you'll be aware of. So when you log things on the website around graffiti, street cleansing, that kind of thing, you should now be able to log that on the website. You get a reference number, and then you get regular updates on the progress of those schemes. What we've been working in the background is now we're satisfied that that's working operationally for us, we're then looking at how we can scale that out to the other areas. And there's work ongoing, sort of an outline with the greening team for all of the greening types of functions, but there's still some more work to be developed on there. In particular, the website. So actually, Mel and I did have a meeting last week with the team across the council, and we are setting them the challenge and setting them to task to push that forward, because we're recognising not only is it frustrating for members in not getting response back, but it's also draining on our own officer time when we've seen it being so effectively delivered in the street care team, i.e. anybody can log something on the website and it goes straight to the right officer. And as they progress through that task, you get regular updates. At the moment, we haven't got that system for this side of the team, but as I say, we're pushing to push that forward. And we did get an email, I think, the other day just to say that can get pushed forward now. So haven't got a timescale, which I know is the next question. And as soon as I have some indication of what that will be, we'll let you know. And I am aware, but I'm not involved because it's more of an IT project, that there is a ambition still to set up a members type portal where you can see all of your tasks and have a really good feel for what's going on in your area. I don't think we're quite there yet because we need to get these other areas up and running operationally. In addition to that, we've also been talking to ID Verdi about updating the schedules online. There obviously has been a delay because the standards have been changing. We're really keen to make sure that we've linked that up on our own website. So again, anybody can go online, search their road and find out when the next grass cut is due. We did have that set up, but the standards haven't changed. They've got to do quite a bit of work to get that up and running as well. But again, once that's up and running, we'll be letting members know so you can keep tabs.
Just very quickly, Rosa, that's fantastic, thank you. And I appreciate that there's so much involved in all the IT stuff. I mean, I have no idea. I just want it on record, when it comes to sort of neighbourhood priority and that side of the team, the responses we get, even when we're reporting online, are really, really good. And often if we're just contacting neighbourhood priority, we'll get a response from someone in the CS team or whatever you want to call it very, very quickly. So that is awesome. It's just this side that we'd love as well. So thank you.
We absolutely recommend that, yeah.
Councillor Bentley.
Thank you. I think I look with some envy because I have to deal with maintenance companies in a lot of my areas, which of course that may not get the same response and are not governed by anyone, so it seems quite odd. However, that off my chest, and I will keep saying it because it's an important point, we don't want two levels of service that our residents are receiving and paying in some cases twice. That's not very good. However, my question is, this seems a very good opportunity to look at shared services rather than working in just isolation of one council. And I just wondered how much we've explored sharing services with other local authorities.
So in terms of this particular area, so grounds maintenance, we haven't had lots of conversations because obviously our contract is still 3.5 years away. However, I do regularly talk to a lot of my peers across the organisation and actually had a meeting with peers yesterday on a very similar conversation. So it will definitely be something we'll be exploring over the next few years. Again, recognising that some of our partner authorities also have contracts that will be ending at some point. So very good opportunity, as you say, for us to start those conversations.
I think that's great, if I may, Chair. I think that's great and good to hear. I think I'd like to see a timeline behind that, because if we wait for another year, then another year, that might not happen in terms of getting it done. And I think there comes a day zero when all the contracts are brought into line or they start again. And I think 3.5 years gives you a good run in now to have a serious conversation, because local authorities are going to have to save money in all shapes and sizes, and it doesn't actually matter who's in power in government. The same thing is likely to happen. So I think we need to be ahead of the game on this. So I'd like to see a timeline come back around shared services around the whole of North Essex. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Rosa.
Thank you. If you could just bear with, please, Councillor Young, because Councillor...
Just if I may...
No, it's fine. I think you wanted to answer the question that was put, did you?
To say that significant progress has been made. It's a real administration priority, as it would be for county. And of course, we're mindful of devolution, those of us who see the opportunities that come with that. So just simply put, the aim and direction is shared services for as fully as possible for back office, made really significant progress, sharing staff and facilities, ICT, procurement, on the path of HR, and other things as well, for all the reasons we know. It saves you money, it increases resilience, and North Essex leaders signed a protocol to accelerate that work only a couple of weeks ago. So I think there is a point about sharing some of that progress. It has been mentioned by the Chief Exec in some of her briefings, but I accept that not everybody is able to make that. So happy that we take away the action chair to circulate to the committee and to members as appropriate a very brief summary and timeline. Really good progress, and we're leading the way with those who are willing.
Thank you. Councillor Young.
Thanks very much, Chair. Got 3 questions. The highway rangers, they were always a bit of a mystery when they sat with Essex County Council as to how to get hold of them. I wonder whether there's a simplified way that we can, as members, access the services of the highway rangers in a bit more transparent way. I think, you know, you mentioned making it plain when cuts are going to happen, and I think, you know, you've done some updates to us as members, but, you know, it's one of the things that we get frequently contacted about, so I don't know how that could be improved in the future, and making that more plain to residents that, you know, you're on your way back to Greenstead or wherever it is. And the final thing is about pay of ID Verdi staff, and we had Unison came to Cabinet, I think just before the changeover in May, making the case that they were looking for sort of similar treatment to council staff. So I suppose the question for me is, and Jess might be able to help with this one, is when it becomes an in-house service, they will presumably be on the same terms and conditions of our employees, and whether we've done anything about resolving that issue with Unison regarding the ID Verdi staff for the next 3 years.
Would you like me to answer this, please? Yeah, so in terms of if transferring the staff back in, as they come in, they're absolutely protected on their existing terms and conditions. I think if the terms and conditions are not favourable to them, I think we would quickly encourage and consult with them in terms of changing the terms and conditions and move them onto contracts with Colchester City Council. And at that point, their staff would, their pay would be, you know, a parity, and they'd also receive the pay awards as staff too. Thank you.
In terms of current pay and the conversations that happened earlier, I think the difficulty that the council faces is that we have issued a contract, and the staff are currently employed by ID Verdi and are delivering the works against that contract and the agreements within there. So I think it's really challenging for us to have that conversation with ID Verdi about changes in pay because of the nature of the contract and the work that we're doing. But I know that there is due another meeting with them shortly to have another conversation about that. Just going back to your other two questions, in terms of the highway rangers, they actually aren't operating any longer in Colchester, the reason being that Essex County Council funding for that was withdrawn this year. So what has happened is obviously we don't operate that service anymore, and one of the members of staff has actually been retained by the council and is a maintenance technician and is doing lots of fantastic work on the ground for us, which is really great. So anything kind of highways related in terms of kind of verges and all of those kind of works isn't something now that this council can undertake, because it's not our responsibility and not in our protocols to do. It would be back to Essex Highways and for them to see if they have the resources to deliver that. But as I say, they pulled that funding this year. On your second point about when cuts happen, yeah, absolutely agree that it would be fantastic for us to be updating more councillors. You know, we're coming out next week to cut your grass verges. Unfortunately, we don't have the mechanisms to do that. But the website that I mentioned earlier with ID Verdi will be able to, once they've got it all up to date in the background, will enable anybody to go on there and search for their street and find out when it's due to be cut next. So that will go some way to closing that information gap.
Thank you. Councillor Smithson.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to talk about the transition to the in-house model and ask whether it's actually viable to transition to an in-house model, given that it will come with a significant capital expenditure requirement, which I don't think we will be in a position to fund. And if that's the case, what's the alternative?
It's a very good challenge back. And being 3.5 years away, as we've already discussed, we don't know what the position of the organisation will be in at that time. We don't know how costs are going to go up or down. So I think it's a really valid question and something that we do need to take away as an organisation and consider whether we need to reevaluate the operating models that we evaluated last year. Obviously, one of those options, as we've already mentioned, is looking at partnership working. And so I think that's part of those conversations and considerations.
But I think our medium-term financial forecast will already demonstrate that we wouldn't have the ability to fund the capital expenditure. So I think yes, it's 3 years away, but 3 years is not a long time if we need to negotiate a new contract with ID Verdi in 18 months' time. That's where I'm thinking.
So just to be clear with the ID Verdi contract, we wouldn't be able to extend any further on the current contract. So when it ends in October 26th, it will end. But obviously there are similar options still available to us that we looked at before, which could be a retender, which we'd have to do about a year or so in advance of that. So yeah.
But will also be more expensive when we retender.
Councillor Lissamore.
Thank you. Rosa and I had a meeting earlier this week to discuss some of these issues, but I think it'd be good to discuss them again in a more of a public forum. But obviously there was a lot of complaints about the No Mow May, and the cabinet member did a radio interview that I did with him, did admit at the end of the interview that there had been problems with the ID Verdi contract and that they hadn't particularly fulfilled some of the things that they should be fulfilling, that they'd struggled. What meetings have you had with ID Verdi over the issues over this year? And I know it say in the documents that No Mow May will not be going ahead in the same form as it did this year. Which will be good for residents. We all understand the environmental impact of leaving, but I mean, I've got 2 patches of grass that Leslie knows very well outside my house that I think are really struggling to have a good environmental impact by just being left. To have a meadow takes a lot of management. It's not you can't just leave them and let them grow their own, because they just won't. Also going a little bit as well about Sam said about us being informed as councillors. Yes, the communication between councillors and residents with the maintenance contract is very, very poor. We really struggle, and we discussed it earlier this week, where if we as councillors can be informed, and we are sensible, we do understand that there are always weather issues, that the machinery breaks down, but we need to know when the maintenance contract, when grass is actually going to be cut in our area. And the other thing that I think we really need to see is what areas are covered by Colchester City Council and ID Verdi. I think all of us as councillors have tiny little areas within our wards that we don't actually know who owns them, we don't actually know. And I remember, Councillor Goss will probably remember this, a hedge where we've had numerous, I'll say arguments, because it is arguments, because one minute the council says, no, we're not going to cut it. Then they say, yes, we are going to cut it. We need to know which areas are covered by this contract and which areas aren't. So I think that needs to move forward. We need a map. We need to know what areas are covered, and we need a timetable. We need much better communication.
Yes, Councillor Smithson.
Thank you, Chair. Just picking up on something Councillor Lissamore said, if ID Verdi are not delivering against the contract, does it contain financial penalties for ID Verdi, and are we enforcing them?
Okay, thank you. So let me start with No Mow May, grass cutting and areas that we cut. So you're quite right. we've made a decision on the back of this year in terms of No Mow May that we will next year can only apply that methodology to the areas which are classed as conservation areas, which are the areas where we are encouraging wildflower and naturalisation, because that makes so much more sense than lots of other areas which I think caused confusion for a lot of residents about what was happening. The whole issue was compounded, however, by the weather in terms of the rain and sunshine cycle, and the humidity just saw everything grow at such a rate, which was fantastic for our gardens. They look lush and green, but actually the rate of growth was phenomenal. And the impact of that was that when we go out and cut our grass, or when ID Verde go out and cut that grass, it takes a lot longer. So a particular area which may take half a day was taking about 2 days to cut. Because as you know, once grass grows a particular length, as you start mowing it and you go over it with a grass lawnmower or similar tractor, the wheels flatten the grass, and as you drive away, it all pops back up, and you've got all these tufts, etc. So it looks messy as well. So not only does it take a long time, it doesn't look great either. And so the No Mow May, compounded by the weather, compounded by the quality that we could achieve in terms of cutting, was a perfect storm in it appearing that ID Verde weren't performing, that we didn't really know what we were doing, and everywhere looks a mess. Now that the weather has improved, she says, even though it's rainy and humid, ID Verde now are on a much better footing in terms of the grass is much shorter. So their trips out and their cycles out are much quicker and back to what we would normally expect, and will be much tidier going forward. Going back to when are they going out, at the moment, the only answer I can provide that's immediate that will give you some information is that website once it's been updated by ID Verde. If we can in some way, and I look to Mel because I'll ask her to take that forward, if there's some way that we can start providing that information to ward councillors, a week or a month in advance of all the different areas that we're going to, we definitely would like to do that, because I know especially that a lot of the contact that I and the team get is about grass cutting, and if you have that information, you have those tools, then we can empower you to be able to respond to residents and inform residents and keep everybody up to date. So we'll take that away as a challenge to our team and see if we can get that up and running. But there is an interim, hopefully, that we can get sorted out sooner rather than later. In terms of what areas are cut, obviously it will be any council owned piece of land. We also work on behalf of CBH and also with the Essex County Council. I'll speak to the team because there will be some maps, I think, that members may already have access to that just need different layers. So let me find out what the answer is. I don't want to kind of commit anything at this meeting, and maybe provide a briefing note or training or similar to be able to inform you as to what those areas are. So we'll take that away as an action. And then in terms of performance with ID Verde meetings and financial penalties, so we do have regular meetings, as you would expect with such a large contract as ID Verde, not only operational meetings which are held by our sort of operational staff with their operational staff to make sure we know what they're doing every week and that we're happy with that. We also have contract meetings with them, and in addition to that we undertake what we call PQMS checks. So we go out, ID Verde do their own checks, we do our own checks, and then we come back, and that's part of their KPIs, that they have to get a certain score above a certain percentage, and we use that to monitor the performance of the contract. There are financial penalties, and we have acted on that over the last few years with them. So if they are not delivering a site to the standard and the specification within the contract, then and certain measures aren't met, then we will issue them with a financial penalty and a deadline for them to get that standard back up and running again. So we do enact on that as well. Hopefully that's answered all the questions.
Thank you. Councillor McCarthy.
Yeah, so it's a super quick one. It's just following up on what Rosa said in response to Councillor Smithson. As I recall it, the KPIs weren't being met to a certain extent when we were looking at extending the contract for 3 years. So it was a case of clamping down on it a little bit and ensuring there were regular meetings and potential penalties. So yeah, I think that's all in hand. But it was just to back up what you were saying, essentially.
Thank you. Right, I'm going to put my little two penneth in. So, spoiler alert, Stanway has very dense grass. So there is a lot of work going to create the wildflower areas, and there are a couple near yours. So that's good news. The other thing that I've raised before, and there is a bit of a crossover between Essex and Colchester on the weed spraying. So Essex are weed spraying the highways and Colchester are sweeping the highways, and sometimes there's a lot of debris left where the weeds have mulched down and self-seeded, and then it becomes a really big job. And I know that you were going to talk to Essex about that to see how we can work together better. The other thing, do you know what weed spraying Essex are using? Because I know that Colchester are very proud of the fact that we've moved away from the word that I can never say.
Okay, so yes, I have spoken to officers at Essex County Council, and I'm just going to quickly try and find the email on that so that I can confirm the situation with there. Bear with me a second. Bear with me. But you're right. So firstly, Essex County Council do weed spray. They don't weed spray all roads. They will only focus on priority roads, as we would expect. Colchester City Council undertakes street sweeping. And again, you're right in terms of once a weed has been sprayed and it starts to die, it does end up leaving mulch. And unless that's swept away, all it does is encourage further weed growth, because effectively you're creating a nice bed for them in the curb edge. So on the back of a members training session, as you say, which it was raised, I've spoken to officers and we are going to get through their weed spraying schedule. And then what I'm keen to do is work with our street sweeping team and make sure that we follow at an appropriate time with a road sweeper, so that we can collect that debris and hopefully reduce the amount of weeds that will then grow, which hopefully then will further reduce the need for weed spraying. Have I got the answer? Yes, I have. Bear with me. So the weed spraying will be happening in September. So we will likely go out from end of September into October, as I say, to leave sufficient enough time for that weed killer to apply. Glyphosate is the word that you were struggling with. We in Colchester have eradicated it as far as possible. Obviously, there are certain areas where there is a need to use it. I don't think Essex County Council have the same policy. And I wouldn't like to confirm on their behalf the kind of chemicals that they use on the highway. I think there is some communications, but I can't find that at the moment, that confirms what products, etc. they use. But as an officer of Colchester, I probably wouldn't feel comfortable in replying on their behalf.
No, that's fair enough. Can you confirm, when Essex are weed spraying, are they going down the whole road, or are they doing spot spraying of the worst areas?
To my understanding, from an email that again that we've received recently, they are spraying whole streets. That's my understanding.
And hopefully before the rain comes down and washes it off. Just one other quick question. Can you confirm, or can you let Essex know where our wildflower verges are going to be, so that if a utility comes up and wants to do some work there, they are aware that it's a wildflower area or a bulb area? Thank you.
Yes, noted.
Thank you. I'm not going to comment on what we at Essex County Council use. I don't hold that information in my head, but I'm just going to make one comment, Chair, that in your great questioning, you've definitely highlighted the great inefficiencies of two-tier local government.
Councillor Lissamore.
Sorry, very briefly, but as far as I'm aware, it's spot weed killing and not general weed killing. we have worked with some particular residents associations who will clear their own pavements outside their own properties and help with other people, so if they drive through with a weed killer and there are no weeds, they will not use the weed killer. So this is something, if a resident is very concerned about weed killer being used in their area, then they do, have, if there are no weeds there, the weed killer will not be used.
Councillor Smalls.
Just following on from that, the spot weed killing, because there have been incidents in Colchester where people sort of not wildflowers really, flowers from their garden are growing out of their walls, like hollyhocks, foxgloves, things like that, that people wanted there, and then they've been sort of obliterated by the weed killer. And I know, for me, I've had some nice verbena that was growing out of my wall, and then one day everything's dead. So there is, it must be difficult, but there are some things that are sort of just growing out of your wall that aren't weeds. So I don't know if so I would prefer lots of people rather than it just sort of go down the whole street.
Okay, as I say, that's an Essex County Council operation, so we can feed that back and pick up on those points and see if there is something that they can do, but
We've kind of strayed off topic a little bit, but so thank you for all the answers, because it's really useful for us to say or feedback what we're hearing and work out how we can work together better. So thank you. And it would help if I press the button, wouldn't it? Thank you. So we're all happy with the updating for information early and happy to move on.
Noted.
Right, the next bit, I believe, is over to Owen. David, did you want to come in with anything?
Just waving madly at you about speaking through the mic, Chair.
Owen, shall we have a look at the work programme?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I won't really add anything to it, just to note that Cabinet approved the requests that the panel put through to it for adding items to its work programme, and advised that the panel might want to consider the prioritisation it puts on which items to consider. So Rosa took away those items, spoke to senior management colleagues to ascertain when would work to have those different items added to the work programme, which would suit the work that officers were doing on those subjects. So what you've seen here in front of you is a product of that and the scheduling we've put there. There are two items which we haven't scheduled at this point. One was the licensing food health and safety policy, which I believe Councillor Smithson raised. We spoke to Sarah White, our senior licensing officer, who confirmed that this is basically the content of that is dependent on national regulation legislation. She confirmed that there would be changes made to reflect changes in the structure of the licensing team to reflect that. I'm sure she'd be happy to talk through that with any members who did want to talk about it. And likewise, Karen confirmed that the item requested on, let me get this right, the council's approach to supporting community bids to buy community assets which were put up for sale. Have I got close enough? That was discussed, I think, in 2012, 2013 by the policy review panel, but we don't have a policy on it ourselves because it's basically dictated by national statute and we have to follow that. But I'm happy to take questions on the work programme that we've got there.
Thank you. Thank you for the clarification. Have any councillors got comments that they make that they'd like to make? Are you happy with the schedule?
Agreed, Chair.
I think that's all tickety-boo then. So we're sticking with the schedule, and I think that is it. So I declare the meeting closed. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.